He who saves his country does not violate any law. This was tweeted on February the 15th of 2025 by US President Donald J. Trump, and has been at the very core of the latest faux controversy surrounding Trump, thanks very specifically to the efforts of the Never Trumper crowd, who are trying to use this quote in an effort to paint Trump as somehow being an authoritarian, that the quote itself fundamentally and exclusively promotes authoritarianism, and that Trump is the worst of tyrants for daring to make said quote. But is this actually true? Does this quote mean that Trump is literally Hitler? Well, no, of course it doesn't. In reality, while it is true that this quote could accurately describe authoritarian regimes and their rise to power, including ignoring the established laws of the land, it is also worth pointing out that this exact same quote would just as accurately describe George Washington, Mahatma Gandhi, or Jesus Christ. Men who were in a lot of ways the exact opposite of tyrants. But let's move on into how this phrase could just as equally describe either tyrants or outright anti-tyrants. For what it's worth, it is of note that the origin of the phrase itself is often attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, though there is no actual documentation confirming that he ever actually said this. That said, it is fair to say that Napoleon did, in fact, embrace the meaning of this quote, even if he was not necessarily the one who coined it. And that does move us quite nicely along to the actual meaning of the quote. The idea that it may become necessary to circumvent usual legal proceedings in order to save a nation. George Washington himself did this by commanding the armed forces of a revolution against a government that had become foreign and no longer representative of those they reigned over a full ocean away. It is also of note that after that aforementioned revolution, George Washington would also serve as part of a government that would ultimately abandon and replace the original Constitution of the United States, that said Constitution being the Articles of Confederation, with a brand new Constitution that has been in use ever since, specifically on the grounds that the Articles of Confederation simply did not work. Going to the example of Mahatma Gandhi, he too, as aforementioned, did indeed embody the idea of saving a nation by ignoring typical legal proceedings. Though in his case it was typically far more peaceful in nature, he was still at the end of the day arrested multiple times because he had technically committed crimes in order to achieve independence for his country. And of course, unsurprisingly, the same is true for Jesus Christ, the individual who was supposed to be the chosen one, the savior of all mankind. And specifically because of these claims and goals, he was ultimately executed for the crimes of treachery against the Roman government, as well as blasphemy and sedition. Now, as previously mentioned, this quote can just as easily apply to legitimate tyranny as well. For example, this quote does just as equally apply to Joseph Stalin, who ignored the laws of the land of Tsarist Russia when he was a communist revolutionary, and then went on to ignore the laws of the land of the Soviet Union once he became the general secretary. Still trying to argue that the quote is fundamentally authoritarian on the grounds that some, emphasis on the word some as in not all, of the people and movements it can accurately describe were authoritarian, is like saying that free speech is fundamentally authoritarian because, historically speaking, a bunch of tyrants exploited the values of free speech on their rise to power by making speeches. Thus, it is nonsensical to argue that it is fundamentally authoritarian to embrace the quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." It is instead more accurate to describe the quote as being anti-status quo, as ultimately that is the only thing that everyone that the quote accurately describes really has in common. You can't even fundamentally claim it as anti-establishment per se, as some individuals that the quote accurately describes were the establishment at the time. Remember, this quote would still accurately describe Thomas Jefferson when he was actively replacing the Articles of Confederation with the current US Constitution, and he was very much at that time a member of the establishment of the United States government. All of this is to say that the main point that I'm making here is that the ridiculous claim by Never-Trumpers that Trump is somehow secretly ultra-Hitler exclusively because of this quote is, well, frankly, ridiculous. The quote just as easily describes anti-tyranny as much as it does actual tyranny. The only thing that everyone that the quote accurately describes has in common is the idea that they are anti-status quo. Do I expect Never-Trumpers to honestly have a discussion on this or have their minds changed on this whole situation? No, I don't. But of course I don't have to. It's not a matter of me convincing the Never-Trumpers that they're wrong. It's not even a matter of me convincing everyone else that I'm right. It is instead a matter of me pointing out that the Never-Trumpers are wrong and convincing everyone else that the Never-Trumpers are wrong. You don't have to agree with me. It's just a matter of getting you to disagree with them. But with all of that said, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.